Are you enjoying the convention? All right, I'm glad. Today's session I'm pretty excited about because we're going to embark on a very dangerous undertaking. We're going to try to interpret current events which are almost at a point of being indecipherable in many sectors of our economy. And we're going to try to look at future events. Now, fortunately, you're not going to rely on me to do this. I have got a terrific cast here today, which includes a panel of some of the most visible leaders in the title industry, and our second speaker, Tucker Carlson. If any of you have watched cable TV, he's had several incarnations and is really one of the most engaging and thoughtful speakers that I've ever seen who works on this circuit. And he's going to talk about where we are as a country and where we're going and what's happening in the elections. Anyway, I want to get this rolling. So if we could bring our first panel to stage, please.
Chris Abenante, President of the Eastern Operations, Fidelity National Title Group.
Doesn't Chris get a theme song? I mean, say like Chicago, Chicago.
Dennis Gilmore, CEO, First American Title Insurance Company.
Dennis.
Malcolm S. Morris, Chairman and CEO, Stewart Title Guarantee Company. Randy K. Yeager, Chairman and CEO, Old Republic National Title Insurance Company.
Let's sit down. All right, here's how this is going to work today. We're going to try to keep it pretty loose. I know that's hard to believe when you look at these guys, but they do occasionally loosen their tie, and actually so do I. But somebody said to me last night, I'm really looking forward to this panel. I said, why? He said, because I have a street view of things. And I said, is there a difference between the street view in your mind and the view from the corporate suite that these guys sit in? He goes, oh yeah, there's a huge gap. Okay. I said, well, you got your chance. So here's what we're going to do. This is street talk today. Street talk starts in these microphones. So, you've got to have the temerity to come up and line up and offer up a question. I can assure you, I know each of these men pretty well, and they don't even like to bother showing up for softballs, okay? They know how to swing at the hardballs, and they know when to let one pass, too, probably, and probably a few they should on today. But that's how this is going to work. I've got some questions to kind of keep the conversation going, and but when you get comfortable and you got something you want to ask, stand behind a microphone and I'll call on you. Now, what I'd like to do to sort of start things off is play a little clip that goes to the current foreclosure mess. So if we could roll that videotape, please.
Good morning, this is your TBWS Daily, and I'm your host, Brian Stevens. I'm Frank Garrett. Yeah, they're going to sue. It's going to leave the door open for yet more litigation. The litigation that American Land Title is concerned about, and Bank of America will seemingly cover under coercion from the feds in a fight against the states, all in time to put a concerned face on this problem right before the elections.
There you go. Yeah, and let's not lose sight of our state-elected congressional leaders again in time for November state elections are beating the war drums of a foreclosure freeze ever so louder. It's not just the attorney generals in this case.
No, really. This is like a 15-round championship bout, Frank. In one corner we got the feds, the other corner we got the state. In one corner we got the new homeowners, the other corner we got the old homeowners, and right in the middle, acting as a referee, is our title insurance. It's American Land Title, ready to watch this sucker go.
This fight is going to be ugly.
Does that kind of sum it up, guys? All right. Let me just throw a question out here to my panel. This is an opportunity, I think, It's probably an opportunity to inform people about what we do. There's probably some downsides. But how do we even think about what's going on? And what are some of the knowns and the unknowns? How do you work your way through a swirling set of issues that's so interconnected? I'm going to bang Chris here right to my right because he's always a straight talker. Chris, what do you think?
A couple of things. First of all, I'd commend what ALTA has been doing on all of our behalfs with some of the issues that we're facing. I think they have represented our interests well, and they're a good voice. Actually, they're the best voice we have. So if you aren't aware of what ALTA has been doing, you ought to be. They have really stepped to the plate and carried the ball for us. So for that, thank you, Kurt. In terms of individual appetites and what companies are doing, Kurt, I think we're actually going to take our lead from what ALTA is doing.
Well, and let me just say, Chris, that one of the things I've really appreciated is the way we've been able to unite this industry. It's been it's fallen a lot on the underwriter section. The agents section has been kept very informed. But as an industry, you've been given ALTA the leverage, if you will, to speak on your behalf. And I think that in any situation like this, we're a lot stronger when we hang together than if we're all scattered trying to do our own thing. We appreciate the support we've gotten from each of these companies in allowing us to have that voice. Anybody else want to comment on this? How long is this thing going to go? And what does it mean if it goes for a long time?
I agree.
His lawyer's standing right back there.
Yes.
I'll just make a comment. The federal government released a set of guidelines yesterday dealing with the foreclosures. If strictly reading from the press with no inside knowledge or information, Bank of America, I think, indicated in news articles about a 60-day period of reviewing their processes and getting them corrected, and I suppose all that will be through about November 3rd.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Let me just tell folks what I can tell you, and that is that literally while we're in this convention, our team has been in very close negotiations with the federal regulators, Fannie and Freddie. We've drafted language that would basically indemnify title insurers on the future sales of REO properties and, frankly, on some of the back sales because we didn't create this problem. They're massaging our language, and that's ping-ponging back and forth. And we're closing in, I think, on getting the Fannie Freddie and their regulator comfortable with the notion. The nice thing that happens in a negotiation like this, though, is that you can't start talking about what a piece of paper does until you agree on what the problem is. And that requires sort of thinking it through in advance and understanding what role everyone does play. I think that we're going to be looking at explaining the title industry for a long, long time, at least the next few months, because we're going to be very topical, and there are going to be media outlets and policymakers who really want to understand what we do and what role we play in this market. Let's switch to the economy for a second.
Kurt, before you run off on the next topic, one thing I think it's important that everybody really in the room understand. You got those properties that have been sold. You got properties in the process of being foreclosed, and it's good, I think, from our industry standpoint, from the banking industry standpoint, that those processes are being reviewed, that the banks will be through that process very carefully before they're turning information over to the title insurance companies to deal with. And then you have properties that the banks already possess. And that REO property is, I think, where the real issue is today, and they will be reviewing each of those. And thanks to the work that American Land Title has been doing, and I think it's going to be very good. We all realize that there is a way to keep money flowing into the mortgage industry, and that is if the lenders do have the ability to foreclose on the collateral. The main thing is they do it correctly, and the industry certainly supports the correct foreclosures that need to be done and being done correctly, and the consumers being given all the opportunities that they have to respond. So that's very important, and we're going to be looking at that REO sector, and I think the work that the American Land Title Association has done with the banks on those REO properties right now is going to be vital. Realize we don't, unless there's unusual issues, that the foreclosure is going to happen. And if a foreclosure has already taken place and there has been anything improper, what is the correction is a re-foreclosure. It's not an expensive process. And I would imagine there could be some deed in lieu that will short-circuit that. So
Well.
I don't see this being a real long process.
Randy, you want to add something?
If I might just add one thing before we get off this topic. I'll apologize, first of all, for actually sending out underwriting memos with guidance on how to treat specific title issues. There was absolutely no intention for any of this to have been in the press. What you read in the press was a distortion of what the memo had said, and we tried to clarify it. We have a policy that we just don't speak to the press about issues because of the interpretation, whatever it might be. If you try to explain what you meant, it never quite works out that way. So we don't comment. Our first reaction to this was call Kurt. And within a couple of hours of picking up a USA Today and seeing us in the front of the money section there, we panicked, called Kurt. He calmed us down, got us back on track, and we started there. And I've got to say, the industry is the best solution to this problem. They're working very hard. The Forums Committee, all of the attorneys, the underwriter section worked very diligently on it and was working hard on it yesterday. And you should be thankful that you got an organization like this to support you through what can be a crisis, at least to our industry. So Kurt really deserves some thanks for what he's doing.
You're here.
We're just going to end this panel discussion now. It's quick while you're ahead, right? We've got a question right down here in the front row.
Hi, thank you. I'm from Connecticut, and in my state, the submission of a document of an affidavit without personal knowledge is clearly fraud on the court, and all the foreclosures that were submitted that way are really subject to overturning. However, we have a very strong standard for overturning a judgment, and I'm wondering if your companies have gone through and undertaken to look at the 23 judicial foreclosure states and determine which states have, say, weaker standards for overturning those judgments, and if you've done that, what are the problem states that you see?
I believe
You guys,
We all agree.
you're right, and I'm willing to bet every company up here is in the process of doing that as we're sitting here. And the reality is there are going to be challenges out there, and no one's going to just go headlong into this without putting some thought and effort into making sure that what we do, our intent, which is our intent all the time, we do it the right way.
and to my mind, I'm just going to make some political commentary. I mean, the second the lawyers are involved in this, everybody's got to run to their separate corners and shut up. We can't really even have a conversation here today, okay? And we've got some of the best real estate attorneys in the room right now. It would probably be a heck of a conversation if you could put a whiteboard up and start thinking about this and comparing notes, but we can't do it. And that's just the state of litigation. Fortunately, you've got a trade association. We can, under our umbrella, deal directly with all of the government parties and the lenders and the media, and hopefully some sense comes in to this country, and we handle this in a way that doesn't that is respectful of individual rights, but that is also respectful of material facts. And one of those material facts is that we don't have an economy that is kicking out anywhere near the output it should. And I'm going to put one of my panelists on the spot here for a second, because last year Dennis Gilmore was the bull of the group. I mean, we're on the road to recovery, and now we're sitting here, Dennis, I'm sorry, but we're looking, I wish you were right, but we're staring at a double dip, possibly a double dip inflation. The Fed's getting ready to buy bonds again to try to create more money supply as the output slows down. What's your outlook?
Again, I agree. I still probably will be a little out. We don't think that it's that bad this year. Let me qualify that. We don't think we're going to see a double dip recession. We think that the NBA forecast right now is probably accurate. And what we're looking at for 2011 is a $1 trillion market. And so how we're just getting our heads around that is that's the reality. And that's how we're going to run our business. And that's how we're viewing the marketplace right now. Putting aside the foreclosure issue, because we don't know what that will ultimately do. We don't know how that will ultimately slow down the supply lines. And if you want a little good news, just a slight little good news, the current MBA forecast shows resales up 20%. Now, I think if that actually happens off of 2009, that's early signs that the economy is slowly starting to heal. So our best guess is that forecast is accurate, and we think that's the new reality.
Chris?
Dennis and I like to have this discussion. I'm usually on the other side of the fence. But what I would say is this. I actually polled some of the managers around the country, and it's interestingly, they are pretty optimistic. Now, optimism, as Dennis said, it needs to be, there's some caution here. We have a pretty deep hole we're trying to dig out of. And while I think we will see some improvement, I don't think that improvement equals growth. And by that, what I mean is, I don't think we get to growth until somewhere around 2013, when we're back to even, going back to maybe 2007, 2008. Then we're kind of even with when all this stuff started, and then we see real growth from that point. So I think we're going to see improvement, but I think the improvement is really just getting us out of the hole we're in, which is good news. I mean, I'd rather see us having volumes increase and homes moving again. You know, I get concerned when a third of the resales are really either distressed property or coming out of REO. I get concerned when on the commercial side, if the numbers reported are accurate, when $1.4 trillion of debt comes due in the next 4 years, and 52% of those properties today are underwater. And you know, so there's a lot of unanswered questions, but I think the reality is things are moving in a positive direction, and yes, with a little luck, it will continue. And we're forecasting a little luck, and that will continue to improve.
So we're actually on the same side, because that's basically our same view of the world right now. And again, I should qualify that when I'm optimistic, that means it's not falling off into a double dip. That means we're probably near a bottoming occurring, depending on what state you're in and what region you're in. And I mean a bottoming, not an uptick, just a bottoming. And I think we all will face tremendous, probably untold stress if we double dip, because the industry has already gone through such retrenching, it's unbelievable. So if we actually do a double dip, it'll be a tough road.
Is the economy, I mean, it's always said that the housing market is local. Are you seeing, growth in strong markets in some areas of the country and real weak ones, or is this malaise of slow economic growth really casting a pall across every market across the country right now?
Again, we'll see. We see greater strength out of the West right now, parts of the Midwest, some strength. Obviously, we're all worried about the East with the foreclosure issue.
You guys got anything to add to that, Malcolm?
Can I talk before Malcolm? He steals all the good ideas.
Yeah, go ahead.
Got my speech right here.
We've got the information right here. Malcolm and I are going to collaborate on this one. If there's a silver lining I think, in this foreclosure disaster. It's that I think we might see short sales start becoming more of our business. I really think that there are a lot of homes out there that could have been sold. As all of you know, you can sit on some of those short sale files for 2 to 3 months before you get an answer from the bank. I think if they're not processing foreclosures right now, you're going to see some short sales go through, which is, I think, healthy and probably is a better way to approach the housing crisis than just foreclosing on somebody's house. So I think that's a good thing. In terms of the overall economy, of course, I agree with Chris and Dennis, and I'm going to agree with Malcolm too before he even says anything. But
Well, if we're all agreeing, we must be wrong.
Yeah.
he's our newest honorary member, and I think that's great and well-deserved. He's contributed a lot to the industry. Aside from that, I think he can also straighten out the economy. But we need jobs in this country. Corporate earnings season has been pretty good in terms of earnings, but we all know why, and that's because private industry in America is innovative. And we had a discussion about this morning with some people, but we were creative in terms of how do we make a bottom line out of a much smaller top line. And you all are here today because that's exactly what happened in your own operations. And unfortunately, what has helped create a positive bottom line, or possibly a better negative line, is that we were able to reduce variable expenses. In our industry, of course, that happens to be personnel expense. That's in every other industry in the United States as well. And that's what's happened. We're not creating private sector jobs, except with stimulus money that goes to a private company that then, puts it back into the private sector as far as counting those dollars. But until we get some real growth in our economy via new jobs, we're not going to see much. And Bernanke's talking a lot about buying up treasury bonds, lowering the value of the dollar so we can export more goods, creating markets in other countries where we can distribute our goods and services. That's a big factor in helping create job growth, but I'm not convinced that that's a healthy way to do it. I think there's plenty of services and products that can be built here in the United States that'll help Americans and keep those jobs in the country and create new jobs in our economy and bring the real estate recession out of the doldrums.
Randy, let me ask one follow-up. I know, Malcolm, you got real-time data, I think, on your BlackBerry there you're going to share with us. But just, you mentioned something really interesting. You talked about making a bottom line out of a smaller top line. Do you think that the industry has done this at this point, so that as an industry, as painful as it's been, we're right-sized? I mean, I think at the time when this industry served a nearly $4 trillion mortgage market, and this year we'll have, $1.5 trillion. I mean, that's a lot less capacity, right? Now, if you're the right size, you can serve that capacity profitably. But are we, as an industry, have we made all the moves? And I mean that for underwriters and agents. Are we at the right size?
Well, you always have to right size depending on what's going on at the top. This is evidence that we've got this many people participating in the convention this year, and I think that's great. Is there room for improvement? There's going to have to be if the mortgage origination market goes down to the extent that they're predicting next year. Like Kirk said, 2005 we had a nearly $4 trillion mortgage origination market. We're due, $1.3 trillion this year. Predictions as low as $800 billion I've seen for next year. So it doesn't mean that we can rest or that we're comfortable in the expense side of our operations. So we're going to have to keep looking at those things in each of our operations, all of the underwriters, all of the agents, and every other industry in America. And that's the way it works. That's the way it works. That's the difference between private industry and government. We can't just charge people more to make up for the expenses that we're incurring on a daily, monthly, annual basis.
Malcolm?
I have really enjoyed this convention. Stewart this year has elected to honor Mark with the industry dinner aboard the big ship out there on Saturday night. And so I've been a little footloose and fancy-free, and I've just been calling many of you sitting out here trying to get from the very grassroots and what's going on in different towns, different sectors, different parts of the country. Spoke to one individual who said, man, I started my business up in 2007. You know, how many of you who've been in business for 20 years would have loved to start your business in 2007? But when you go back and look at it, the industry had built literally the capacity that we talked about, serving a $4 trillion mortgage industry to the very peak. You know, your leases, your personnel capacity, everything had been built to handle that kind of a volume. And if you all will remember, it was Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns. I think I spoke about that last year, but we saw in California, I think, home prices off as much as 40%. And then in August of 2007, we saw 30% of the lenders did not show up at the closing table with the money to close the transactions. And we don't get paid unless the transactions close. So that was kind of the beginning of saying, okay, now all this downsizing, you're going to have to cut from the very top. That was a lot of cutting. Where are we now? Everybody has been through that cycle. There are survivors here, those that have figured out how to do it. Everybody has made some great and valiant efforts. The key thing is the preservation of this industry, which is key to the preservation of I think, the entire economy of the United States. Real estate is so critically important. From the interest rate perspective, I think Doug Duncan said yesterday, with these kind of interest rates, imagine in the old days, if you'd ever seen these kind of interest rates, I guess it would have been an $8 trillion market, you know. And yet people are not buying because they are afraid. We have got the federal government 3 years of deficits, 1.4. I have a hard time shifting from B's to T's now. 1.4 trillion deficit, 1.3 trillion next year, $1.1 trillion deficit forecast. Those things, it's not the individual. Some of the bankers that I've spoken, sitting here in this audience today, I got more money in my bank in deposits, I can't loan it out. Well, somebody please borrow money, you know. Nobody wants to borrow. People are standing on the sidelines. To get a perspective, $3.8 trillion is equal to all of the indebtedness on all the commercial real estate mortgages there are. And in 3 years, the federal government will have needed to borrow $3.8 trillion. None of us can even imagine what that looks like. It's hard to say, much less what that looks like. So who's taking the money out? Who's borrowing that money? Who is going to be behind a rise in the interest rates? It's going to be the federal government's borrowing. Literally, as people seek funds for the world. So I think mortgage rates are going to go up. Rates are going to go up in America. And I think it's going to be a real struggle as people try to continue outside of a double-dip recession with a very, very, very low and
Let me ask you something about these rising interest rates. You know, right now, I mean, the Fed's worried about deflation, so they're pumping up money supply. But eventually, if we get back to growth, interest rates will rise. And I mean, is there a risk, Malcolm, do you think, of a gap where when interest rates are rising, my guess is if second interest rates start to rise, we actually have a little refi boom again.
And a purchase boom.
Yes.
But then they're going to get out of sight. And does the purchase market come back smoothly in time to reply? Does this purchase market come back in time to replace the?
I mean, I have a feeling If we start to see a rising interest rate, it's probably the best sign we can see, and let me explain why. It clearly will get an indication the economy is healing at that point.
Okay.
When the rates start to raise, we're going to probably see employment come down. We'll start to see signs that the economy is actually not going to double dip and is improving. We as an industry will probably go through some stress because we'll probably have volume impacts, but it'll clearly be probably the most helpful thing we can because we're showing improvement in the economy. One other comment I want to make, I was listening to all of them, and my feeling is this: we're all sitting here, while it's been extremely painful to go through what we've all gone through, we're probably all stronger companies than we've ever been, or we wouldn't be sitting here. So we're probably a more efficient industry than we've ever been sitting here now. It's also interesting, I have to deal a lot with Wall Street, so it's a very different world. And all of the companies, because I watch all of us very closely, have far stronger balance sheets now than we've ever had. Our reserves are probably higher than they've been. Our leverage on our balance sheets are lower than they've been. Our surplus to premium are lower than they've been. So actually, through all of this, the industry's come out probably stronger than it's ever been, and we all need that. The last thing we need is any kind of instability at the industry level, which questions the need for our products and services. So It's hard to see it that way, but we're actually stronger than we've been.
By the way, I'm really disappointed in all the men and women on the street here who are not lining up at the microphone. But while I give you one more chance to do that, let me ask you guys about RESPA implementation. This time last year, we were staring down the barrel of a gun that said we were going to overturn 35 years of established law and go with a new HUD 1. It's going to be related to GFE. I knew it required system changes. There's been a lot of confusion. How's it gone? How's the transition gone for you and your company? And if you care to, have you gotten any feedback on whether this experience has improved for consumers at all? I'm going to make you go right. Randy, let's start with you down there. I won't bug Chris this time.
Well, we had some, I think everybody knows we had problems in January. First few weeks, and it was almost chaos, trying to get deals closed and trying to help the lenders through the new GFEs and how to actually implement the reform. I think it's now, more business as usual as far as reforms are concerned. And I think, I don't know that there was a consumer benefit in the reforms that were passed. That's probably left up to the consumer groups. I don't see it personally. I think there's too many disclosures that people aren't interested in, and the whole process needs to be simplified. But I think that the whole game could change in January as HUD transitions out to the new Bureau. And I think that's and none of us know what's going to happen. I mean, we could probably speculate, but it would be pure and absolute speculation because no one knows what the final implementation will be after the Bureau starts looking at the way that we actually process title. And what does that mean for our industry? I don't know. We're not totally exempted from this. And we're going to be affected by it, probably immediately with a national data call, gathering information and reviewing, charges and things like that. And I think that's going to put a burden on underwriters and agents. And ultimately, I don't know that it's going to make a whole lot of difference to the consumer.
I'd just like to say that clearly the title industry, it was an opportunity to shine. The lending industry seemed to be quite behind the times in terms of being ready for RESPA last January, and which resulted in about a 6-week hiatus in loan applications, let's call it formal loan applications under the law. And that put a real hard, I think, stop on the industry. Everybody knew that was a short-lived problem. But our industry and you, working with each of the underwriters here, I think did a great job of working with the lenders, consumers, and getting everybody on board. We called in ALTA and said, hey, let's get a meeting with HUD. We need to all get everybody in the same room. And folks, this is spring training. This is preseason. HUD, no fines, stop the threats. Let's get everybody in the room and let's get everybody out there playing on the field and discover where the new lines are and move forward. And thank you for leading that, Kurt, as well, and getting HUD aboard with that. And I think it's our industry. I'm really proud of each person here and what you did to help us through that new change of 30-something years.
And who said we couldn't innovate, be flexible, and be resilient? I mean, this industry, which stuck its nose in dusty books for so many years, turned around and made a transition faster than the lending industry is what I'm hearing. Anything to add to this topic? You guys transition go okay from your perspective? Dennis, Chris?
I agree. Same.
Chris, all right.
Yeah,
we don't-
I'd agree. And again, kudos to ALTA for stepping up and helping
okay, that's
get
enough.
us together.
That's what I wanted to hear.
I get $1 every time
Yeah,
I
you
do
guys.
this. So.
We've got a lot of side bets going on these days. Frank.
Thank you very much for sharing your time and wisdom with us this morning. We all benefit from this. I'm Frank Pellegrini. I'm from Illinois. And I'd like to talk a little bit about ask you about the Consumer Financial Protection Act. We adeptly and effectively kept the business of title insurance out of that piece of legislation, the Dodd-Frank bill. However, notably, we weren't able to keep settlement services out of that bill. And for many of us on the street or in the street and fighting in the street, settlement services are a very important role that we serve and a very important link for us to connect business with our customers. So I'd like to ask you a two-part question. First of all, what is your view, how do you predict settlement services will be affected through the bill? And secondly, how do we keep the playing field level between underwriters and agents as a result of that? Have fun.
Let me back up and just talk a little bit about the act itself. In an attempt to, I think, again, help consumer, I think Washington has overstepped its bounds. That's my personal opinion. The way this bill is laid out, there are bringing together various entities and agencies that exist today independently that will either be combined or become part of other agencies with some incredible powers. And the one that sticks out the most is that they aren't subject to going back to Congress to get funding. So I'm a little concerned about the act in and of itself and what plays out. But to the specifics of how it's going to impact us, they can't figure out who's in charge. They can't agree. All the rulemaking that has to come together, the rulemakers that have to come together and develop the regulations, if you will. This is a bill that by its own term says, and the regulators need to regulate. And trying to get that many bureaucrats in a room to agree on who's in charge, who gets the upper hand, where it ultimately ends up. I think, Frank, the question, while valid and I think a concern for everyone, is a little premature because there's nothing to react to yet. And until we get some rules and that start to get generated and we get an opportunity to react, we're just all spitting in the wind.
Yeah, I'd add to basically, we feel the same way. We know the rules will change. The rules haven't been set. So it seems like a reoccurring commercial here, but we all have to pull together, support ALTA. We have to work with a common voice to influence and to direct and guide how we think the rules should be crafted. And so it's probably incumbent on all of us to continue to support our trade association aggressively so we go through that process as a group over the next 2+ years.
Well, you have a new agency, as has been said, that is not speaking at the whims of Congress. They literally fund themselves through fining, which I guess would be coming from everybody in this room. They'll be looking for you. So make sure you do it right. On the other hand, I would say that as HUD moves over, I think the work that Mark Winter and Kurt did this past year in building the HUD task force with this industry, and again, stepping out in front, becoming the leaders, becoming those that really sat down and helped formulate the rules with HUD. They built a lot of respect. So you're not gonna be lobbying Congress. You're gonna be working with staff members. And I think we built a great rapport with those staff members. And as we move forward, I think that ALTA is going to be in the real leadership role in helping establish those rules, Frank. So we'll, your input, I think everybody's input here is vital. I mean, ALTA has built over this last year, has built its membership to the highest in history at a time when the industry has chopped in half, right? And so this is going to be very vital for you to get the input from the field in. Remember, you guys are in the down there where the rubber meets the road. You're seeing the issues that need to be addressed, and it's going to be very important that you speak up. You know, you're going to come up to the mic, speak up on the issues, let ALTA leadership know so that we can represent you. And who knows? I mean, you may wind up being the spokesman with them as they go in and work. So, you know, anybody comes to the mic, you get the job. So,
Eric, you got a question?
That's right,
Ann will be
Frank's
calling you.
Eric Schneider from Maryland and ALTA's Education Committee. Gentlemen, if I could take you from a discussion of economics into a discussion of title insurance for a moment. I left last year's panel discussion and conversations with several of you afterwards with an understanding that we were going to go back more to basics, partly because of all the claims that had come about. Going back to fuller searches, going back to looking at surveys, examining titles, actually reading documents. I haven't seen anything come out in the past year to evidence that from any of the underwriters that we work with or those that I see through my education committees. I was wondering if that has taken a back burner because of the economic and foreclosure crisis, or if that was a direction that we're still looking to go in this industry.
Great question. Randy.
Well, if you want to see our direction, just read the New York Times. They interpret all of our underwriting memos.
Yes.
But I think that's accurate. And of course, we're primarily an agency company. And as a result of that, we do send out a lot of underwriting memos trying to encourage our own operations, the agents that represent our companies on the best way to do business, best practices. And I'm sure that's identical to the other companies. And yeah, we do need to get back to basics, and we do need to do underwriting. This foreclosure thing, we're going to do underwriting like we always have. Foreclosures have not created a lot of claims in this industry. And I don't expect that there will be a lot just because of this process. As long as we take our underwriting seriously on the underwriter and the agency level. And I can assure you, from our viewpoint, we will continue to impress upon everyone who's involved in the underwriting scenario to exert the greatest possible caution when they're doing their underwriting.
I'd say from Stuart's standpoint, we're about two-thirds, 67% of all of our policies issued by independent agents. We rely on very heavily for the work that you do. One thing that we have established is a feedback system, and we are focused with our agency services managers now working at the state level to make sure we build feedback loops with the agents, what's going on. We're analyzing with the claims department, are there similarities of what's happening? We're digging in by state. One state, we came up with 92% of all claims out of one state came from one ALTA claim category. 92%. So yes, we issuing a new bulletin on that. We're changing the underwriting guidelines in that particular state. We're delving down really into the nitty-gritty and working on that. We're seeing the claims being generated by our now book of agents as being the best in our history. And they're doing just an excellent job. And I think it's really coming from the meetings that we're having. All of the agency meetings are involved with underwriters, with the claims people, 360 communication, and it's very, very important. Ian's been talking about that for years, right? Why don't the underwriters talk to the agents? We can tell you what's going on.
We've also, this past year, done extensive work to lower or improve our risk profile across our company, direct and agent base. So maybe as a company, we're not doing a good enough job explaining that or publicizing it, but just like you, every claim of a significant size has a root cause analysis. We modify our underwriting agreements or our underwriting approach to identify, patterns that we see. We're deploying is extensive a base, a set of tools that we can to avoid the claim. We've kicked off a whole new group that does nothing other than try to identify high-risk searches and avoid claims. Our view is we want to lower our risk profile and we want to avoid a claim because we probably forget it's not a good consumer experience. We probably really minimize how painful a claim process is for a person going through it. So fix our risk profile and I think improve the consumer experience.
I would echo everything that you're hearing. There's definitely been a change in terms of how we approach the business and a lot more attention being paid to what's going on and what the cause is behind these things and what can we do to change it.
One of the things, Chris, I was at a meeting of large agents earlier in the year, and you came by, I think, and spoke right at the end of that meeting. And one of the questions, I was kind of shocked that it seemed fairly widespread, and it's a small group, maybe it wasn't widespread, but they said, we don't get any claims feedback. We get notification that a claim was been paid. How about letting us know that there is a claim, because we might, A, be able to solve it for a lot less than you're going to, or B, at least we'll learn from the experience and we'll be able to modify our procedures going forward.
I think it's valid criticism, and I took it back, and my understanding is we are making an effort to improve the communication. It really, if the claim is there and we're not talking to the people who are generating the claim, we're not doing them or us a service.
You guys committed to the same kind of agent communication? I mean, it sort of seems like common sense. I was surprised to hear it wasn't happening, but sometimes these things are easier to say than they are to do at a systemic level.
No, I think we're all directed.
Are there, well, on the topic of claims, and then I know I've got a question waiting over here, though, are there any trends, new trends that we're seeing that we need to worry about? I know claims went up overall, so there had to be a trend within that was more disturbing than another. Is it mortgage fraud? Is it just,
I can, from my perspective, I would tell you search and exam continue to be the leading cause out there, and it just drives me crazy. And I mean, that's what we do, and apparently we're a third of the time we get it wrong. Mechanic liens have become a pretty big problem, I think, for the industry in the last few years. Fraud and forgery can remain out there. It is not as bad a problem as it was, but it's still a problem. Those three categories today would still be pretty high on our list of things that we need to pay special attention to.
We're getting short on time, so I'm going to go over to Blake here, who's been waiting patiently to ask a question. Jack, we'll come back to you then.
All right. Hi, Craig Haskins from Wisconsin. My question is, we've been getting calls, I'm assuming this is true for the room, we've been getting calls from somewhat nervous people who have purchased homes out of foreclosure. And interestingly enough, their real estate agents are calling now too, saying they're nervous as well because they assisted the buyers on their purchase. And we've been kind of putting that answer off. And I'm wondering if we could go back to the offices now and say that it's fine, that those people that have purchased homes with title insurance have nothing to worry about, and sort of punt on the issue of the properties that are actually in foreclosure now.
No one's going to. Let me jump on this because I've been answering this question. The reason you have title insurance is so that you don't have to worry. Okay? If they've got an owner's policy, they're going to get defended by a title company. The American Land Title Association has said, I've said that it is fairly unconceivable to me that judges are going to start throwing people out of homes and giving them back to people who originally owned them prior to the foreclosure, particularly if those people weren't paying their obligations on time. It would create societal chaos if that happened on any widespread basis. Certainly one of the reasons that we're engaged in conversations with the lenders is because we know our litigation costs are going to be real, because we take that obligation very seriously to defend those homeowners. Jack, we've got time for another question.
Good morning. I really have two little questions. One, in Louisiana, if it is your business model to primarily rely upon title agents as your source of title business, why have the underwriters file platform rates which are advantageous to national companies and put us, the local agent, at a disadvantage? And two, I'm really kind of concerned about something I call title Zoom, which is sort of like legal Zoom. And what I mean by that is that I see a proliferation of business migrating to vendors that are closing transactions not through title companies or title attorneys, but through non-educated notaries who have the inability and are unauthorized to discuss the contents of the documents that they're putting before their customer. And I think in large part we're creating a disservice to the customer that in the end is going to raise claims for the underwriters, but individually for the person that has that title problem, we're really creating a disaster on something that is their primary investment. Thank you all.
Anybody want to jump into the fray on that one?
Could he say that again?
Yeah. Well, how about let me reframe that
I
question.
should do it.
Seriously, there's a very interesting question that's very philosophical that avoids you talking about individual company practices here, which you shouldn't. That is, there is market pressure to turn what is a professional practice into a manufacturing exercise. There is market pressure to reduce costs. That pressure isn't going to go away. Is there a time and a place where we have to say, wait a minute, we can't dumb down this hamburger much more? I mean, I can buy a $1 hamburger and I can buy an $11 hamburger, down the street from one another, but how low do we let the cost of that hamburger go? How low do we let quality go? At what point do our claims start to jump back up again if we skate into the area that Jack was talking about?
I'll jump out here, but literally pricing is something that we can't discuss up here. Probably the Justice Department is sitting on the front row somewhere.
Speak into your microphone. Yeah.
TV. But literally, I mean, there is national pressure, of course, by the lending community. At the same time, I think the lending community is certainly seeing the importance of title insurance, the importance of what you do. And many of your local banks, many of those who are not operating nationally, have a lot of business that they realize the very value of what you were speaking about, and I think would be demanding a standard closing and more attention to those closings. So everybody realizes you get what you pay for, and if you want less in service, you may realize more problems. Maybe this foreclosure matter here is going to just raise the interest of the banks. I'm sure forget the foreclosure information that you're seeing in the press. What do they have as a bank tries to foreclose? Do they have all the appropriate documentation? Do they have everything they need? Do they have the customer statements in their files that they would like to have when they go through this process? We're all dealing with a real hard time right now. Economically, the banks have lost quite a bit. The consumers have lost quite a bit. And I think everybody is re-looking at that. So I think it's an opportunity for you to really market to your local banks too, especially set new processes.
We're going to take one last question before we move the panel along. Marcy?
Marcy Gray, Seattle, Washington. My question is in regards to time frames and being from the street level. Is there anything that we can do in this organization to help our employees have a
It's a great question, and I don't know the answer, but my interaction with a lot of the large lenders, they continue to reinforce to me that they want and need our products. So they're not looking for us to not sell them our products, but the reality is we face a situation now as a group, as an industry, that the top 5 originate 60+% of all the loans in the country. And there's been a massive consolidation of the lending community right before our eyes over the last 2 years. So the problem we're all going to face is, they have a consolidation of power, and they're going to set rules. And we're going to have to figure out as an industry how to work in their rules. It's vastly different than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. And so don't have a good answer to the time question. I just know that we're all going to face the continued pressure by our customer base. And that is not to discount our product. It's to make it faster, if you can, and make it cheaper, but they want what we sell them.
Well, actually, ALTA is working on some legislation that will, in part, begin to address some of that. And rather than me kind of scramble around here, Kurt, why don't you tell us a little bit about the legislation?
All right, it's going to be a good note to end on, and that is H.R. 4229, which will be reintroduced next year, so it'll have another number. Don't even bother to remember it. But essentially what we're saying is, look, customers need more time, meaning borrowers need more time. So borrowers need to have time to look at their closing documents before they come to the closing table. In order to give borrowers their closing documents before they come to the closing tables, banks need to give us loan instructions and all the other necessary information in advance of the deadline for the borrowers to receive their documents. And we have to have time to put them together, a reasonable amount of time, a day at least. If there's this notion has really caught the imagination of a lot of members of Congress because it makes sense. And I think what we're doing is trying to balance the right amount of time and the right amount of statutory requirement. Anytime you put black letter law in the books of the nation, this land, it makes people justifiably nervous. But we're getting there because certain things you just can't allow to be so crushed that the title agent and the closer is in exactly the same harried position as the borrower who's trying to understand the transaction as things are being faxed in and arriving while they want to go sleep in their new home. We hear you. We've crafted a solution. We're going to try to get it through in the next Congress.
Kurt, I just think the point that Dennis made of the concentration of lenders, if you will, presents a great opportunity that our industry has been looking at for a long time. And I think that everybody in this room, be they competitor, agent, underwriter, would all be looking to have a standard set of closing instructions. And so, Kurt and Ann, as you embark upon this next year, as part of setting the rules and making sure that the people are not trying to put on this industry things that are their job to do, that we need a standard set of closing instructions that will permeate this industry, that will help that whole process.
You know, guys, I was not the one that was supposed to leave the stage with a to-do list, okay? That was you. I don't know how you did this, but I'm sure it has something to do with all your success. Thanks for taking the time to share your insights and opinions with us today.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Somebody's phone.
It's a very tight-knit community. Unless you're in title, most people do not know what we do, and they don't realize how much of a vital role we play in the real estate process. That if title and escrow do not do their jobs, real estate transactions will not close. The lenders, the real estate agents, the consumer, all of them depend on the title insurance industry to make things happen. And what's great is seeing at a closing somebody purchasing their house and the smile on their face and knowing that we as an industry are ensuring that they are going to be able to live in that house as long as they want to. And that's kind of special. You hear about we insure the American dream. Well, we really do. And if it wasn't for title insurance, it'd be very difficult to own a home in the United States. ALTA is key. On a national basis, without ALTA, we would not have a voice in Washington. We're constantly being attacked by consumer groups, by regulatory, by special interest groups, and without ALTA leading the charge on legislative matters and regulatory matters, it would be 50, 51 state associations trying to work together, and it would be virtually impossible. And ALTA's just an excellent clearinghouse of information. What we have here at convention, at the federal conference, the ALTA accounting meetings, you don't get that type of sharing of information between companies and individuals without a strong land title association. And ALTA provides that conduit for information for the industry, and I think it's vital to our success. I do love what I do, and that's what gets me up in the morning and gets me going, and it's exciting. But the people, it's kind of taking it back to your first question. It's the people that really excite me in title insurance, and without the good quality individuals, this industry wouldn't be what it is today.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome ALTA President Mark Winter from Stewart Title Guarantee Company.
Well, I hope you're enjoying our general session programs. What makes for a successful, worthwhile convention is the topical nature of the convention. And just think of the two news items that have really crowded everything else off the front pages. One being the foreclosure issue, which our panel discussed, and the other being the mid-year elections, which our next speaker will discuss. From a political perspective, 2010 will be remembered as a year of major overhaul to the United States healthcare and financial industries. But what impact will these changes have on the future of our country and the upcoming election? Given voter frustration over the $700 billion bank bailout and the present unemployment rate, November's elections are shaping up as a referendum on those holding office. To give some insight, we have invited Tucker Carlson to be our keynote speaker. As an American political news correspondent and commentator for the Fox News channel, Tucker constantly has the pulse of Washington, D.C. He also is co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller, a senior fellow of the Cato Institute, and formerly co-hosted CNN's Crossfire and MSNBC's Tucker. Although he no longer wears his traditional bow tie, he still does ride his Harley-Davidson through the streets of Washington, D.C. So, for an unfiltered view of the Obama administration, Capitol Hill, and how the current economic conditions will impact voters in November, please welcome Tucker Carlson.
Thank you. I have to say, this is not pandering. You all are really well represented in Washington, I have to say, by Mark and Kurt, who I was just watching. I just said to Kurt backstage, I actually understood what you were saying, which is the highest compliment someone from outside the industry can give. I'm actually in the process of buying property right now, so I have a tangible appreciation for the importance of what you do, so thank you. I feel like I've met most people in this room. I got in last night at 10, pasty, unshaven, and then I got up this morning at 7:30, pasty and unshaven. I think I ran into most of you on my forays through the lobby, so I just want to apologize for my appearance. But I had a great time. Everyone was super nice to me, which is a measure of something. I wish I could stay longer. I was checking. I last spoke to this convention 9 years ago, and I have no memory of what I said, but I didn't realize that. I just checked. I figured I would, so I called my assistant to see if I'd ever, yes, 9 years ago, and the thing that we hate most in journalism, obviously, is accountability. So if you remember any of my predictions from that point, I'd ask you to leave the room. No. I want to give you a quick overview of where I think we're going politically. I don't need to convince you that it matters. 3 years ago, I think most Americans were not sold on the idea that elections really, truly matter. In cable news, we always make the case that every election is the most pivotal event in world history. I remember being at CNN when the Dole-Clinton 96 race was in progress and looking straight into the camera with a straight face and saying, no, this really, really matters. Which I think in my defense, I kind of believed at the time. Most elections don't matter. Most things that do matter take place far from Washington and don't intersect with politics. I mean, the decisions that you make that you'll be judged eternally on, the things that'll matter on your death. But who you marry, how you raise your kids, how you run your business, these are not political decisions. And thank heaven. That's one of the reasons it's a happy country, is because they're not political. But I think the election of 2 years ago made politics more significant. It's impossible to argue that wasn't a big deal election. I certainly don't need to tell you all, working in the industry in which you do, it mattered, and this election matters. So I want to tell you what I think is going to happen and why. And I should say, for those of you who are nervous that I'm going to go on one of these rants where I start preaching about the truth. And there's nothing worse than being stuck in a small room in a hotel with some blowhard trying to ram his political views down your throat. I promise I won't do that. Yeah, it's horrible. No, it's horrible. You've been there. You know what I mean? It's the big brother thing. I can't bear it. I do have political views. I'm not on the liberal side. I'm actually about, well, that may be an understatement, actually. I'm about this close to stockpiling weapons and food and moving to Idaho, actually, at this point. So those of you who want to join me in my compound in Coeur d'Alene, please talk to me after. No, I have gotten a little far out lately, maybe like a lot of you, but I'm going to try to restrain it. And be as objective as I can be. By the way, I will obviously open it up for questions at the end, but if you have any comments or applause or, don't wait. I mean, people who speak typically hate to be interrupted, but I spent so many years working in cable news across from James Carville that it makes me uncomfortable. People don't scream at me while I talk. If I can finish a sentence uninterrupted, it makes my palms sweat. It's just so unnatural. So yell out, throw a coffee cup. It's not like you're going to hurt my feelings because obviously, I don't have any at this point. Here's the very quick overview, which will be very familiar to anybody with the USA Today subscription. I don't know if you can even get a subscription, but anyway, if you travel a lot, if you've been in this country lately, the Republicans are going to do pretty well in a little less than 3 weeks in the midterm elections. They are. Now, how well is the subject of some debate, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to address you in years future, so I'm not going to make any hard predictions because, why look like an idiot any more than I already do. But I think it's pretty clear they're going to take the House of Representatives. There are some, I'll be totally honest with you, there's some weird polling dynamics going on. This sometimes happens before elections, where we are seeing cross-currents in the polling data. And it's not clear to me what those mean exactly, but even as it does seem almost very close to a mathematical, certainty is too strong, but high probability that Republicans will take back the House of Representatives. There have been polls in the last 2.5 weeks that show Democrats generically, and I won't bore you with all this in the specifics, but generically gaining. And I'm not sure, again, the significance of that. There may be no significance of it, other than to point out a really obvious point, which is this is the most volatile political season in my lifetime. I've been covering this, this is my 20th year of covering politics, and I have never seen an electorate this all over the place and this volatile. This is not a volatile country politically at all. We have two large, kind of broad, wide parties that are moving most of the time roughly in the same direction. They have differences, of course, but our elections, no matter where they go, don't result in people getting rounded up and, property getting confiscated. I mean, it's a pretty moderate country, and so you don't see a lot of volatility. Typically, you do see it now. So I think it's very likely that the Republicans will take the House. I think it's less likely that they will take the Senate, but it's possible. The real question, as far as I'm concerned, there are two. One, how did Barack Obama, who was at over 70% in the public opinion polling after his election, wind up in the 40s, allowing Republicans to make these gains. How did that happen? It's only been 2 years. A. B, what's going to happen on Wednesday after this election? What's the immediate aftermath of what's about to happen? And I want to take those in reverse order, the second first. The Tea Party is clearly the dominant political force in the United States. Now, we can argue all day about what the Tea Party is. There isn't actually a Tea Party. There are a number of groups with that name in the title. They hate each other passionately. They don't have, boy, do they. I have a reporter whose only job is to cover the Tea Party, with which I'm, just to be blunt, I'm sympathetic. But there's no agreement on what exactly the Tea Party is. It is at this point, and this will change, a leaderless and very broad movement of people who are, despite what you've heard, not mad about Obama being Kenyan secretly or any of that nonsense. I know if you watch MSNBC, you really think that the Tea Party is this, it's like the Klan or something. No. The Tea Party is really simple. It's a group of pretty ordinary citizens who, by the way, happen to have higher educations and incomes than the average American, whatever that's worth, who are mad about a single thing. It's not a religious movement. It's a movement of people who are upset by the expansion of federal power and by federal spending, more specifically. The two are obviously related. But there are people who are upset, in a word, about the debt. We're gravely in debt. And given what you do, a job that requires great attention to detail, you're doubtless aware of this. Some Americans aren't. The Tea Party is. And that's what they care about. So up until 3 weeks ago, a lot of us who cover this, and certainly most, your average dumb political reporter, imagined that the Tea Party was really an auxiliary of the Republican Party. And it's true that most Tea Party members or self-described Tea Party members are former Republicans or Republicans. But the idea was, well, basically it's just like the right wing of the Republican Party. That turned out not to be true at all, because Republican Party leaders and strategists wake up every morning with one thing on their mind. How do we elect more Republicans, right? And same on the Democratic side. That's not, it turns out, what the Tea Party is interested in doing. And we learned this 2.5 weeks ago at the end of the primary season, and it really became obvious in the primary in Delaware, which some of you, I'm sure, were watching. And it was a remarkable event. I'm sure you know the broad outlines. Delaware is a very small, second smallest state. Fewer than 900,000 people in Delaware, all of whom are related to one another. Very sweet people. One of my children lives in the States, great state. They had elected 9 times to Congress and once to governor a man called Mike Castle, who is a kind of liberal, but conventional liberal Republican, sort of northeastern. You didn't have pictures of Che on the wall or anything, but just kind of a sort of moderate Republican, liberal Republican of the kind you get in Delaware. And he, as I said, had been elected 9 times. Now, in a state like Delaware, if you've been elected 9 times and you haven't murdered anyone on camera, you're going to get reelected. This we know, right? So about a week before the Republican primary, signs began to appear that maybe Mike Castle's seat was not safe. And not only was his seat not safe, he was being challenged by a woman no one had really paid much attention to called Christine O'Donnell. And Christine O'Donnell seemed like a very unlikely candidate. For one thing, she's not from Delaware, she's from New Jersey. For another, she hadn't been involved in the party terribly much. She was mostly unknown outside the state. Her most famous issue was against, sorry to say it, but against masturbation. That's what the issue she was known for. Sort of ironic, if you're against masturbation, you're going to hate the U.S. Senate, I can promise you. But she's running for it anyway. That's true, by the way. And while appealing and generally conservative, she's a protest candidate. There are lots of protest candidates. I once had a job at a magazine. My official title was I was on the freak beat, we called it. And I covered all the people who had no chance of winning. And some of them were marvelous people. I really liked them. Alan Keyes, close friend. But they don't actually get elected. They run to make a point. And again, that's an honorable thing as far as I'm concerned. But they're not in danger of representing you in the Congress. Well, all of a sudden, Christine O'Donnell, in the final hours before the vote, looked like she was going to beat Mike Castle. Holy smokes, alarms went off in Washington. Because the thing about Christine O'Donnell is she really seemed to mean it. And the one thing that we're pretty unfamiliar with in D.C. is people who sort of seem to mean it. right? Because D.C. is, and I love it, I choose to live there, and I've lived there for a long time. I'm actually from here. I grew up a couple miles from here. Very different from D.C., but D.C. is fundamentally, it's a Mediterranean city. It is. You want this, I want that. Come on now. Let's reach some accommodation, right? That's what politics is. It's compromise. And by the way, I don't think it's a bad thing. You know, politics without compromise winds up in warfare, as we know. So a little compromise is good, but that's the culture of Washington. There are very few people in Washington who really say out loud and believe, you know what, I'm kind of for this, and I'm kind of not changing under any circumstances. That's just an alien concept. So people in Washington looked at Christine O'Donnell and saw correctly a real threat. And so the day of the election, Karl Rove gets on Fox, where I work, and says, by the way, Karl Rove, of course, the most famous Republican political consultant ever on Fox, which is, I think it's fair to say, probably watched by a few Republican primary voters. On primary day, it's right into the bloodstream of the Republican Party and says, stop, whatever you do, don't vote for this woman. She's crazy. Just flat out, she's crazy. Any other year, if Karl Rove says it on Fox on election day, you know, there's a pretty good chance it's going to come true. This year, the Republican primary voters of Delaware collectively raised a middle finger to Karl Rove. And they elected Christine O'Donnell. Despite all warnings, which are probably true, by the way, that she's not going to be elected. In other words, they voted for her knowing that the seat was likely to go to a Democrat because they voted for her. But they did it anyway. Now think about that. This was the moment when most Republicans where I live realized the Tea Party may have common aims, but it's not a Republican organization. This was the moment the Tea Party sent a really, really clear message to the Republican Party, which is we're complete kamikazes. And we don't care. We don't care. And people who don't care are a threat. Now, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. As you can kind of tell, I'm sort of sympathetic to it, actually, in a way. But it doesn't matter. They're a threat. I mean, it's sort of like if you've ever been sentenced to prison, okay? And you're a white-collar, soft-handed person. You sort of know it. Things are not likely to go that well for you in prison, right? I mean, just, you've seen the movies, okay? So before you actually go away, you call up someone who's been in prison and you say, I've got some concerns. And if this has ever happened to you, you will get the same advice every time, which is you must establish the fact that you don't care, that you're a stone-cold psycho, and you got to do it day one. So you're waiting for lunch with your little tray, someone cuts in front of you, you bite his nose off. And you will never get hassled in the shower again. Because everybody knows at that point that you're not joking at all. You'll do whatever it takes. It's the prison chow line moment. And Christine O'Donnell was the prison chow line moment for the Tea Party. It was at that point that the Republicans said, whoa, you're not joking. You're not seeking to make this compromise. You really, really mean it. And if it means bumping off Republicans in order to do it, fine. Whoa. This has all kinds of implications, not all of which are clear right now, but here are a few of them. One, it means that while John Boehner is almost certain to be the new Speaker of the House, that's not sustainable. John Boehner is a congressman from Ohio, long in Republican leadership. He's next in line. Republicans are big on the next in line idea. They love that. The oldest guy always gets bumped up. It's not bad, just a little Soviet, but it's just kind of the way it works. And it's the Brezhnev theory. And but it has worked. I mean, it's stable. It's an orderly party. It's not like the Democratic Party where just sort of anything can happen at any time. You know, it's like some like random deranged Vermont governor can show up and all of a sudden almost become the nominee. You know what I mean? Or like some state senator from Illinois no one's ever heard of. Oh, well, let's pick him. I mean, that never happens in the Republican Party, ever. Democrats are more fun to cover. Republicans are a little more stable. This is what we know. So Boehner's going to be Speaker, but the problem is that the people who are making him Speaker find him unacceptable. Find him unacceptable. And that's just that's a basic and unavoidable tension that's going to explode into something. Civil war may be too strong, but it might not be, actually. It might not be. By the way, I'm not attacking John Boehner. Everyone who knows John Boehner, some of you, I'm sure, know John Boehner. You can't not like John Boehner. He's just a nice guy. You know, very tan, loves golf, happy to have a cigarette with you. You know, he's just a very kind of, you know what I mean? He's one of 11 children, grew up in a bar his parents owned. He's got the social skill. Like, I really like John Boehner. And in fact, I don't know a single person who doesn't like John Boehner, to be totally honest with you. But when you think of sort of ideological rigor, John Boehner, not the first name that comes to mind, I got to be honest with you, right? John Boehner's always kind of happy to cut a deal. And the Tea Party people will find that unacceptable. So you're going to have major recalibration on the Republican side, literally the day after. Because they're going to have to answer questions like, well, what do we do now? Ugh. And there are opposing forces. The Tea Party people want to repeal Obamacare right away, and they want to start paring down government. And by the way, they have a lot of the public on their side, because the public understands that debt is the greatest threat we face. And that, I mean, the Gallup poll shows more Americans, the latest Gallup poll shows more Americans fear debt than fear terror. And you hate to sort of make relative rankings of these things, but I will say I think they're right, actually. You're familiar with this. You're familiar with numbers. But the Obama administration itself has projected that within just a few years, we're going to be at 100% of GDP relative to debt. 100%. That's not a real economy at that point. I mean, you're Greece. That's not acceptable at that point. And so that must be averted. And both sides are lying about it, and everyone knows it. Both sides are lying about it. The Democrats, you can just predict the answer. What's the answer? Tax rich people. Tax the top 2% because they're not paying their fair share, because they don't actually pay 51% of all federal, oh wait, they do. Okay, well, it doesn't matter. Rich people are going to pay for everything, the top 2%. Now, I'm opposed to that philosophically, but even if I were for it, as a math question, it doesn't work. In other words, you could, okay, I have an idea. Let's just take the top 2%. Let's just literally take those people and nationalize them. Let's just empty the populations of, I don't know, La Jolla, Jackson Hole. I'm serious. Fairfield County, Palm Beach. Just take all the people and send them to Borneo and steal all their stuff. And just take all their stuff and liquidate it and apply it to the federal treasury. Not enough. It's not enough. There's not enough money, actually. You could do the math. That will not do it. On the Republican side, maybe a little more honest, but maybe not that much more. The Republican solution is, let's eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. Yeah. Now, obviously, I'm for eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. Like, who isn't? I'm also for the children. But that's not enough. It's not even close to enough. In fact, you could take, again, whip out your calculator. You could take all non-military domestic discretionary spending and basically eliminate it all and just leave, like, you need someone to inspect the meat, pave the roads, post like 4 guys with rifles on the border. That's it. Just get rid of all of it. And it's not enough. The truth is, and you already know this, and if you don't, treat yourself to half an hour on Google and you'll see, the truth is the debt is driven by entitlements, period. And there are really two, Social Security and Medicare, particularly Medicare. We hear a lot about Social Security and it's on the precipice. Yeah, it is nothing compared to Medicare. As a driver of debt, nothing compared to Medicare. It's Medicare. Now the problem is, of course, Medicare is wildly popular. That's why it's so expensive, because people like it, and not just leftoids, but right-wingers like it too. Like, who doesn't like Medicare? Everyone does. The Republicans ran against Obama during the health care debate on Medicare. They said he's trying to cut Medicare. In fact, they did what we call in Washington the cat food argument. Are you familiar with this? It's an old Democratic standby in the final moments of the campaign. You accuse your opponent of all kinds of things, but in the end, you accuse him of trying to pare back entitlements, thereby condemning your grandmother to eating cat food, usually on a third floor cold water walk-up in a bad part of town. And the Republicans did that. They said the problem with the health care bill is not that it's too expansive, that it curtails your freedoms, that it forces you to buy health insurance, that it totally busts the cap on the debt, that it's kind of crazy, actually, to spend this much money when we're out of money. No. The argument was it trims Medicare, and your grandmother's going to wind up eating cat food. I'm not singling the Republicans out. I mean, both parties have done this, mostly the Democrats, honestly. But the point I'm making is there is a bipartisan consensus that we cannot touch entitlements. And the reason we can is because people like them. Okay, that's fine. I'm all for bowing to the public will, but the public will is on a collision course with reality. It just is. And this is not one crackpot's opinion. Again, it's a math question. And so somebody is going to have to stand up and say that. And by the way, the first 4 people who say it will be just jumping face first on the barbed wire, hoping others run over their backs. Because it's just death. It's just instant death to say something like this. But those 4 people are going to be members of the Tea Party or backed by the Tea Party. That's the 4. That is the issue. And that's going to be the issue within the Republican Party right away. Now, longer term, there's this question of what happens in the 2012 election. And I can promise you, as I said before, it's never really a question on the Republican side who's going to get the nominations, the guy whose turn it is, right? Always. It's just a very orderly, very hierarchical party. And that's not the case this time. I mean, typically on the Republican side, you want to know who's going to be the nominee. Just look at who lost before. Because Republicans love it when you lose, because it establishes your bona fides as like a genuine person. Democrats, by the way, hate, and I'm not sure which model is better. I really don't know. It's a management question. But on the Democratic side, the second you lose, it's over. They hate you. You lose a presidential race and you are instantly exiled to Eastern Massachusetts State Technical College for nursing, or wherever Mike Dukakis went when he lost in '88. Like, that's it. They don't want to hear from you again. You're not allowed at hardball, you know? I mean, then that's a low bar, trust me. Having worked over there. But that is, you're gone. On the Republican side, you lose and they love you. Barry Goldwater, you know, fewer than 100 electoral votes in '64, biggest blowout of the century, leader of the movement. And I love Barry Goldwater. I'm not attacking him. I'm just saying that's the mindset. So by that criterion, who's lost before, we know the Republican nominee, right? Mitt Romney. Of course. Mitt Romney, he looks like the result of some genetic experiment designed to produce the perfect presidential candidate, you know? Got that Easter Island-like head, you know? He's just very majestic looking, you know? He does. Does he not? And he sort of knows what he's doing, and Bain and Company is such an impressive fact in his resume, but he's not going to be the nominee. Mitt Romney's not going to be the nominee. We can say this with certainty. And not for the reasons that he lost last time, by the way. I mean, he lost last time famously because people were uncomfortable. Republican primary voters in some states were uncomfortable with his religion, which I think is really a shame. But I think that's not an issue now. I really don't. I don't think people care as much, just 4 years later. He lost because he was perceived to be a flip-flopper. You know, who's not a flip-flopper, by the way? Smart people change their minds when the evidence changes, right? If you're not a flip-flopper, you know, dumb people stay the course, regardless. Well, I'm just staying the course. Well, then you're a moron, okay? Because you should let the data determine your course of action, right? Right. So we all flip-flop. I'm not sure quite as much as John Kerry or as the former governor of Massachusetts, Mitt Romney. I was actually there when, I don't know, do you remember this? I think it was 94 or 96, maybe 94, when he ran for Senate in Massachusetts against Ted Kennedy, and he was asked during a debate his position on gay rights. And Romney looked right into the camera and said, "If elected, I will be more for gay rights than Ted Kennedy," which is a metaphysical impossibility. Like, unless you are living with a dude, you cannot be more for gay rights than Ted Kennedy. You just can't be, right? It's not, you can't. And then, like, 20 minutes later, he's Mr. Family Values guy. So, I mean, look, there's been some flip-flopping, but that's okay. The reason Mitt Romney's not going to be the nominee, healthcare. Healthcare. No matter how you feel, but you can be totally supportive of it. It doesn't matter, because the Republican primary electorate is going to make the decision. And they hate the president's health care bill more than the devil hates holy water. I mean, they hate it. And Mitt Romney's Romneycare, the Massachusetts health care plan, is the prototype. You know, that may be great or may be terrible. I mean, you know, history will judge. But 2 years from now, Republican primary voters will judge. And they're not into it. I mean, and it's not exactly the same as Obamacare, but there's no question it's the blueprint. It's got an individual mandate in it. And by the way, Romney bragged about that. On my show, to me, I have the tape, and to a lot of other people on their shows, you know, bragged about his support of this. So that's a deal killer. He's not going to get it. Well, you know, who cares, I guess, except this is without precedent, again, in my lifetime. You've never had a wide open primary for Republican, for the presidential nominee on the Republican side. You always have a lot of people. There's always an evangelical or a couple. You know, as I said, there's Alan Keyes, always. I mean, it's kind of, I think it's the law that he runs every single time. There are a lot, but in the end, you know who it is. This time, you don't know. No one knows who it's going to be. And by the way, that's not a good thing necessarily. I mean, from a historical perspective, from a media perspective, it's a great thing. You know, we thrive on chaos, obviously. And the more of it there is, the richer we get. So let me just say, for it. And I think it's important for the Republican Party to figure out what it believes, and this will help. And so that's good. But from an electoral point of view, it's not good. It's not good to have your party fighting with itself in a deep way. You can have a little kind of show trial or whatever, and we all pretend, but in the end, Bob Dole gets the nomination. But when it's truly wide open, it's not good. And everybody is running. I mean, I've lost count of how many candidates there are announced or unofficially unannounced. I mean, every Republican governor, I mean, everyone I know, I think my kids are running. I mean, there's no one who's not running for the Republican nomination. Sarah Palin is running. you know, whatever, very obviously a lightning rod. I just be totally frank about my views. She's hot and she fly fishes, therefore I love her. But I am an unusually shallow person. I am deeply shallow, if that's not an oxymoron. So I think it's great, and obviously it's good for business. I mean, the second Sarah Palin announces I'm headed over to Wachovia and I'm going to get a $500,000 line of credit against that. I'm going to say, look, she's running. I know I'm going to make this money. Please, I'd like it. And then I'm just going to buy another house and hire you all. Anyway, Sarah Palin's running. No one in D.C. believes she's running, of course, because she's not doing all the things one does when one runs. You know, she's not establishing a fundraising network, touching every county chairman in Iowa and New Hampshire, the early primary states. She hasn't written some ludicrous book with a ghostwriter to prove that she's, like, you know, deeply aware of foreign policy. All the things you'd have to do. You know, she communicates exclusively by Facebook, basically. And she goes on Fox. She's a Fox contributor like me. That's not really the profile of the typical presidential candidate. So how do we know she's running? Well, I have heard that from people close to her. She's run before, which is always an indicator. Always. That's the single most predictive fact. Have you run before? I mean, as James Carville once said to me, excuse the accent, he's like, you know, run for president's like having sex. You do it once, you have to kind of want to try to do it again. So there's a high recidivism rate, which is totally true. And also, like, why not? You know, why wouldn't you run if you're Sarah Palin? So she's running. She's not going to get the nomination, but she's going to cause a major kerfuffle. You know, it's going to be a big deal. It'll draw oxygen from other candidates. As I said, every governor, Haley Barbour, Mitch Daniels, you know, a lot of really good, smart people are going to run. And the turmoil of this fight will make it much more likely that Obama wins, to be totally honest with you, and I'm sorry about that. In the end, I am utterly and totally convinced the nominee, I'm just going to cut right to it, is going to be Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey. Now, he's a pretty unlikely guy, and I'm sure this is why I hope I never speak to you again, because I probably am wrong, but I'm just going to go out on a limb. In fact, I would bet my car on this. I mean that. I've got a late model Saab, if anyone wants to take me up on it. Chris Christie is not a candidate who could win in any other year. Chris Christie, I think, is kind of liberal on the social issues, which I don't like personally, I'll be honest, but it's also a deal killer in the Republican nominating process, period. Republican Party does not, you know, Rudy Giuliani couldn't get it. Because someone famously noted had been photographed in a dress more often than Hillary Clinton. So they don't typically that's literally true, by the way. Though less often in a pantsuit, but whatever. But Northeastern Republicans can't typically get the nomination. Chris Christie, you know, obviously doesn't look the part. If you've seen Chris Christie's very heavy-set man. We prefer, you know, our nominees to look like Mark Harmon or whatever. I mean, you know, it's Chris Christie, sort of this big, lumbering guy who's, you know, his shirt tail's untucked and he's very Jersey. His voice sounds like a malfunctioning electric razor. He's always yelling at people. So why is he going to be the nominee? I'll tell you why. I travel a lot. I was on 4 planes yesterday. I'm always around, you know, covering election stuff. No matter where I go, from Maine to Malibu, every time I run into Republicans, they say the same thing. Someone will say, you know, a friend of mine, my old college roommate, sent me a link to YouTube, I think it's called, where I watched this video, and it's the governor of New Jersey, and he's this massive, heavy guy, and he's, like, yelling at the leader of, you know, the teachers union or some public employees union, just spanking him. You know, and he's got a bullwhip in one hand and a microwave burrito in the other hand, and he's just yelling. And I love it. It's like Republican porn. They can't get enough of it. They just love it. This guy's like an animal. He's an animal. Like, he's got to lose 70 pounds, but he's not gonna. On purpose. You know, it's like... This is the kind of year in which the electorate is looking for a candidate like that. Let me just say that. We spend all this time thinking about, you know, who's the perfect presidential candidate? What are the qualities we're looking for? No. In the end, it doesn't matter, because politics is like life. Timing is paramount. What matters is not so much what you're like. What matters is what the times are like. And do you suit them? And by the way, that's beyond our control most of the time. We pretend everything's within our control. It's not. I mean, look at your own life. You know, if you're successful or not, I mean, a lot of that depends upon where you were, and that's not a decision that you were in charge of. Politics not different than that. And America is looking for someone to tell the truth, uncomfortable truths. And if that person is imperfect, all the better. This is a season in which we are going to be looking for someone who is visibly imperfect and is willing to tell us things we don't want to hear. And Chris Christie is that guy. He is imperfect in many ways. Again, any other year, no chance. This year, he's the spot-on favorite. And by the way, there's also a year in which public employees unions are under great and, in my view, well-deserved scrutiny because they're a major part of the debt problem. I mean, we're standing in a state that pays its prison guards $300 grand a year, literally, literally. So, yeah. So we need someone like Chris Christie. So anyway, just to cut the bottom, Chris Christie, I think, will be the guy. We'll see how he does. I want to go back, and I will stop talking a minute and take your questions, but I want to go back to the first part of what I said, which is, how do we get here? How did we get to a place where this wildly popular, very talented, honestly, president is now perceived as ineffective and is pretty unpopular, even among people who voted for him, which would describe every person in my neighborhood, I can tell you, in Northwest Washington, D.C. How did it happen? It's an amazing story, and I'm just going to summarize my view of it because I think because politics is cyclical, and I think it says something important about Obama, but also about politics. Okay, so you can't overstate the degree to which Obama had everything going for him. He came on the heels of a honestly pretty unpopular president by the end. Bush was pretty unpopular. Obama was, was charming, and he is, by the way. He's pretty charming. I mean, many of you, I'm sure, have met Obama, and if you haven't, you will. He's a very young man, and former presidents spend literally decades hanging around hotel lobbies waiting to give speeches, so you will run into him at some point. If you haven't already, at which point you will, he's charming, no matter what you think of him. He's a good talker, which it turns out matters, I guess, in a president. We didn't always think that, but it does. And he won the majority of the popular vote, something that no Democrat has done in 30 years, since 1976, Jimmy Carter's election. That has not happened. So he had this mandate, and he blew it. How? And I'll tell you, my theory, and I think it's right, is that he made the rookie mistake in all politics, which is to believe that voters elected you to bring change. And they never do, because Americans don't want change at all. They want incremental improvement, but they don't want change. Because it turns out that Americans, despite the many problems we face, and despite the very low confidence Americans seem to have in the future, they still support the basic institutions of American life. They like them. They do. And they have every reason to like them, because they're actually worth liking and worth preserving. So the idea that people want their government to rip things out by the roots and rebuild them, totally false. Well, so then why did they vote for a guy who promised change? Well, because they didn't mean it. That's why. I mean, my brother's a pollster. It's always funny to talk to him about polling, and he's always telling me that people consider polls like IQ tests or catechisms. They give the answers they're supposed to give rather than what they really mean. My brother's great example is trying to poll for bias. He always says, call 1,000 strangers on the phone and ask them, like, point blank, so are you a bigot? And what percentage do you think reply, oh, yeah, stone cold? Like 0, You do it indirectly. Is your neighbor a bigot? Oh, yeah, he's the worst. Yeah, he's the worst. Totally. No. But people understand that change is destructive, and they're right. They're absolutely right. And by the way, nothing worth having is created in a day. That's just a life principle that is immutable, right? Nothing that you have, that any of us have, is created in a day. It's not the result of an election or a bill signing, any of it. The way you raise your kids or maintain your marriage or your business. I mean, these are all the products of sustained effort, day in and day out, unfashionable, unacknowledged work, at the end of which you have something worth having. Change is a destructive process. Change is the sandcastle principle. It takes a long time to build something lovely, and you knock it down in an instant. And people get this. They don't need to be told. They understand it intuitively. But the president, despite the fact he's clearly a capable guy, didn't get this. And he tried to bring real change to the country. And people resent the heck out of it. So my question is, well, how did this apparently smart guy reach this very unwise conclusion? Well, part of it is the obvious. He's the president. He's cut off from normal people. I mean, think about how you make decisions.
I make decisions. We go through life and we run into a million different people with a million different points of view. We have all this data coming at us all the time, and from that we synthesize a conclusion. Some people agree with us, others disagree, and we sort of come to a conclusion based on those factors. If you're the president, or anybody at that level of public life, that small group at the rarefied level they are, you never meet anybody who isn't sniffing your throne, you know, or sort of nodding in vigorous agreement about how brilliant you are. I mean, nobody. And you're already flirting with megalomania. I mean, if you think about who runs for president in the first place, imagine looking into the mirror in the morning and saying, you know, out of 308 million Americans, I really am the most qualified to lead. You know, you do not have a self-esteem problem if you've reached that conclusion, right? Anyway, so they're susceptible to flattery, and in this specific, and they all are, by the way, it's not just Obama, they all are that way, but in this specific case, the people around Obama believe in him to a greater degree than any staff has ever believed in any president, and it's bad. My cousin is one of them. My cousin is an Obama guy. I'll tell you my cousin's story very quickly. My cousin was a normal guy. We're from here, as I said. Sort of normal guy. Good guy. My favorite cousin, actually. 4 years ago, my cousin was leading a perfect California life. He was up at Pepperdine in law school, second year, getting great grades, living on the beach in Malibu, with his dog, surfboard, girlfriend, great-looking girlfriend. He's sort of everything figured out, right? One night in the winter, Sunday night, midnight, he's up late watching C-SPAN. Mistake number one, obviously. And Obama comes on, and he's given one of his Obama speeches. And an Obama speech really is like a dog whistle. I mean, most people can't hear it, but those who can, you know, really can. And my cousin was one of those. And the effect on him was biblical. He dropped his nets and followed Barack Obama. Literally. And the next day, drops out of law school, leaves dog, hot girlfriend, surfboard, everything, hops in his little Prius or whatever, and drives across from Southern California to Des Moines, Iowa, to live outdoors in a tent in the middle of winter in a former Girl Scout encampment to devote his life to Barack Obama. And he's joined by thousands of young people just like him from Eugene and Santa Cruz and other pot-smoking communities up and down the left coast. No, sorry. I'm sorry, no, sir. That's mean. So I will say, by the end of that season, there was not a single Starbucks barista left in Mendocino County. They had all gone to Iowa to support Obama. And I was obviously out there, too, covering it, and I was with my cousin and his friends, you know, and they were nice. I mean, I got to be honest. I don't share their politics, obviously, but I liked them all. They were all nice. They didn't hate America. You know, they were just middle-class kids who were doing what kids do a lot in America. It's a long tradition, you know, just Kerouacian, you know, drop it all, get in the car, and go start a new life. And that's what they were doing. It was great. It was an adventure. And so I liked them. But I did notice that there was one thing about them that was different, honestly. They don't hate America. They truly believe in change. For real. They truly believe in change. Not sort of peel around the edges change, but rip it out by the roots change, real change. And my cousin was the same way. And they believe that Obama is the instrument of that change, that he is uniquely capable of changing not just the political system, but human nature itself. I was eating with my cousin 2 weeks ago at Paulo's in Georgetown, right on Wisconsin Avenue. And we never talked politics. We were talking about the health care bill and what a long slog that was, and I obviously opposed it, and he, of course, was for it. We didn't talk about that, just about how long it was, how much money it cost. And I just couldn't resist it. I said, you know, looking back, don't you think it just would have been easier and less costly to the American taxpayer just to get a bunch of planes and fly all sick people to Washington to let them touch the hem of Obama's garment? Which I thought was actually kind of funny. I mean, I'll be honest. He literally didn't laugh. And I don't know if he was offended because he knew I was attacking him, or he was thinking, you know, that's actually not a bad idea. I'm going to bring it up at the staff meeting. So Obama is surrounded by people who encourage, and again, all presidents are. He is, to a greater degree than I have ever seen. And people around him encourage his worst excesses, frankly. But why does he believe them? Well, this gets to my final thought on this. This is a theory. I don't think it's shared by anybody else, but I've thought about it a lot over the last year, and I sincerely believe it. I actually think that Obama is different from any other president we've ever had. I mean, well, obviously, he's African-American. Okay, duh. And lots of, you know, we've spent a lot of time talking about that, and that's great. You know, it's great. I don't, however, think that's the most different thing about him. I don't. That's different, yeah. It's historically interesting, I guess. But it's not the most different thing. The most different thing about Obama, the thing that separates him from all other presidents, is that he has never failed in his public life. And I'm not attacking him. I'm just noting it. And this actually is radically different from anybody else I've seen in this position. I've interviewed everybody who's been president or run for president in a serious way for 20 years. And every single one of them can point, and they often do point, to a moment in their, not personal lives, but their public lives where they just blew it. They failed. They were at a low point. They learned something important about themselves, and then they rose to prominence. And Obama can't. He has never failed in his public life. I mean, he lost some Democratic primary for Congress in Chicago to Bobby Rush. Like, who hasn't done that? I mean, I've done that. I mean, it's nothing. You know what I mean? And his supporters picked him up, and the rest is history very quickly. But he's never really failed. But by the way, that's not unusual in this country. It's a country of winners, honestly. And most people don't know the sting of public failure. I mean, they don't, and that's great. By contrast, everybody knows what it feels like to be successful, because this is a success-oriented country. I mean, if you played youth soccer, you've got a room full of trophies attesting to the fact you're breathing during the games, right? I mean, it's a country that's all about affirmation, and you're wonderful, you're incredible, you're amazing. When was the last time you heard that? If it's been more than 3 days, you have been abroad, because this country's, it's what I love about America. I mean, trust me, growing up in Southern California, I mean, everybody, all the time, your waiter will tell you that. You're incredible, man. You're incredible. Do you want avocado on that? All right, It's great. I love it. I'm that way. But it's interesting to note that actually the obverse of that, public failure and humiliation, is a relatively rare experience for most people. And I don't mean failure in the sense of I failed to live up to my expectations for myself. We all do that. But I mean real failure, where you're a loser, and everybody knows you're a loser. Your business went under because of something bad you did. Your marriage failed. Something that the whole community knows about, and it's not cool. Where your neighbors avert their gaze when you pull into the driveway at night. When you've really blown it. And obviously I'm not bragging. I actually have had that experience. First of all, I was on Dancing with the Stars and was euthanized after one episode for lame behavior. But I've also been fired a couple of times in public for saying stupid things. And, I would not recommend it to anybody, sincerely. If it's happened to you, if you've ever really been ashamed in your own community, it's a very painful experience, and you wouldn't want your enemies to have that experience. But there is, I can say, one redeeming fact about it, and that is it's the moment when you have to stop lying to yourself. It really is. It's the moment when you have to stop telling yourself the lies that we tell ourselves and confront basic truths about yourself. It's the moment you have to stop telling yourself the basic lie of American life, which is you can be whatever you want to be. Because you can't, actually, it turns out. I'd love to be a physicist. I'm not smart enough. I mean, that's just, sorry. I'd love to be a baseball player. I'm not athletic enough. Each of us has qualities given by God or whomever. You can argue about where they came from, but we have them, out of which we can make what we can make based on hard work and wise decisions. But we have fundamental limitations. We just do. Sorry. And this is the kind of thing that you just don't think about very often. I mean, this is the kind of thing that we think a lot about in school. What am I capable of? What am I willing to do to get to what I want, right? But then you graduate, you get married, you have kids, you get a job. Who has time for that metaphysical nonsense? You never think about it again. You never think about what you're capable of, and more to the point, what you're not capable of, until you're forced to by failure. And he has never been confronted with that, ever, ever. I had this bizarre dinner the other night with a friend of mine who's a right-winger, like for real. Like his views are, I'm sure, illegal in some states. I mean, this guy's not liberal at all, okay? So we're having dinner, and he says to me, he goes, you want to hear something sick, repulsive? I'm a journalist, yeah, obviously, of course. He goes, I'd kind of prefer Hillary Clinton as president. And I thought, ooh, that is kind of sick. And then I thought, you know what, I agree with you. And that set off soul-searching, honestly, in me. Why do I feel that way? I mean, I know Hillary Clinton. She's more charming than she seems on television. Not that says much, but she is. But Obama's more charming than Hillary Clinton. She's smart. She's definitely smart. He's as smart as she is, I would say. They have exactly the same politics. So why, in my heart, would I prefer her as president to him? because she's failed, that's why. She's failed big time. Say whatever you want about Hillary Clinton. She knows the sting of public disapproval, big time. I've been on the delivering end of that. I've criticized Hillary Clinton a lot and enjoyed every minute of it. And so have a lot of other people. And I can tell you the one thing about Hillary Clinton is she knows her limitations. She knows what she's capable of. She knows what she's not capable of. She does not imagine she's the Messiah, ever. And she's tough. She's the toughest person in the whole world, I mean, to be totally honest with you. You know how tough Hillary Clinton is? Totally true story. I have this producer called Brad. Is this being taped? Okay, let's not sort of make this public. Totally true story. This really is true. I have this producer called Brad, and Brad is what they call in New England a chowderhead. Do you know that? Brad's only interest is ice hockey. That's all Brad cares about. Brad has like a size 19.5-inch neck, probably an IQ of 85. He can barely read. His only interest is hurting other men on ice skates. That's all Brad cares about. Why is he my producer? Not clear. But anyway, he is. 1994, Brad is a senior at Syracuse University in upstate New York. And one afternoon in the springtime, he's walking to the gym, minding his own business, going off to, I don't know, play ice hockey or inject steroids or do whatever Brad does at the gym. So he's walking along and he looks over. 15 feet away at a red light is a black Chevrolet Suburban. And it's parked. And the passenger side window was down. And seated in the passenger seat is the First Lady of the United States, Hillary Clinton, whom, unbeknownst to Brad, has come to Syracuse to address the student body. And she's talking on a cell phone. Brad kind of adjusts his eyes, and he realizes it's her. And he literally can't believe it. And coursing through Brad's tiny reptilian brain is a single thought. Hillary Clinton, I don't like her. So he gives her the finger. I'm not defending that. It's disgusting, actually. But that's who Brad is, and honestly, that's what Brad did. What do you think Hillary did? She gave it right back to him. She dropped her cell phone, she flipped Brad the bird, and then she smiled. Now, if you hear admiration bordering on love in my voice, it's totally authentic. I'm glad she's Secretary of State. That's exactly what I want seated across from Ahmadinejad during the negotiation, right? Brad voted for her when she ran for Senate. He's like, man, she flipped me off. She's cool. I have to say, if I were to sum up what I have learned in the last 2 years of watching this administration, it would be that's kind of the quality I want. I want a president who doesn't confuse himself with Jesus. I'm sorry. That's like a really important criterion. And as I'm thinking about who to vote for the next time, that'll be foremost in my mind. Anyway, thank you for indulging me. I'll take your hostile questions.
Tucker, I'm Jack Radican from Fort Worth, Texas.
Hey.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate it very much. You said that you think Obama will probably be reelected in 2 years. So given that he is a wildly unpopular president at this time, especially in this room, how does he get reelected?
That's a great question. And let me just to be totally crystal clear, and I think I've been honest about my political views, I'll be living in New Zealand if that happens again, okay? So I'm not for it at all. However, the truth is, part of Obama's problem, one of his big problems, is he has nothing to run against because his party controls everything. And Nancy Pelosi is in his party, and she's wildly unpopular, and she's really earned it, I would say. But there's nothing he can do about it. It's sort of what I think of as the drunk brother-in-law problem. If you've ever hired your drunk brother-in-law, you get pressured into it. Okay, he's a nice guy. You can't fire him. That's why you don't do it. Well, that's the relationship of the president to the Congress when his party runs the Congress. It's like there's nothing the president can do about it. No matter what crackpot thing she says or unpopular things she says, they're both Democrats, so he has to be quiet. The second the Republicans, this is like Life 101, but take over the House, he's going to spend the next 2 years telling the country, they're extreme. It'll be all about the Republicans. And, I got to be honest with you. They are not ready for that scrutiny. They are not. They are absolutely not. I've put 2 reporters this week on a very simple question. Call around to the leadership, to the members currently serving and to Republicans who are likely to win, challengers who are going to win seats in November, and ask, what's the first thing you're going to do? What's the first piece of legislation you're going to get through the House? Like, what do we have to look forward to? I can't get an answer. That's a very basic, this is like 2 weeks away. 2.5 weeks, it's like, you haven't thought about this yet? It's really upsetting, and I say this with love, but it's distressing. And so the Republicans are not ready for the spotlight at all. They don't have a leader, they don't know, they haven't agreed on what they believe. There are these rifts that I explained, and Obama's going to exploit all that. Look, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think that I am. Thanks.
Rob Ptolemy from Colorado.
How you doing?
I heard the other day that Barack Obama gave some kind of interview and said if he'd known that shovel-ready projects weren't really shovel-ready, he wouldn't have, proceeded with that. And also that he regrets he didn't incorporate more of the Republicans' ideas about tax breaks to stimulate the economy. What was he thinking to do that right before the election?
Well, you remember all that talk about how the president's a genius, and they ran this brilliant campaign. I covered the campaign for 2 years. I was the chief campaign correspondent for MSNBC, if you can even imagine what that was like, and at the time. And we need to revise our view of his political skills, I think. I mean, to get up there, you're absolutely right. He got up there and said, well, there are no shovel-ready projects. Really? I mean, how dumb do you think we are? Didn't you just promise that you were going to revive the economy with, quote, shovel-ready projects, but turns out they don't exist? Oh, so all these payoffs to public employee unions didn't right the economy? I mean, it's infuriating. I think there's a lot of evidence that he's actually not that politically smart at all, and maybe not that smart. I mean, who knows? But he has not acted in it, just from a pure political point of view, a very impressive way at all. And it may be that a lot of what we thought was wise during the 2008 campaign was really just due to the fact that the press was covering up for the guy. And they were. I was there. Look, I grew up in a media family. I mean, my dad worked for ABC News. I've been in this my whole life. I don't have any other job skills. I could not do what you do. I'm kind of stuck with this. I always defend the press. But I kind of stopped defending him after the last election. I mean, it was disgusting. They just took sides, just flat out. Now, they've always been liberal. Press has been liberal since Hearst had newspapers. I mean, it's always been that way. A lot of reasons for that, but it just is. There's never, every dentist is conservative. Who knows why? It's true. You ever meet a left-wing dentist? Probably not. They are wingers, okay? I've spoken to the dentists. I love them. But all journalists are liberal. But they would kind of pretend they weren't. They stopped pretending this time. They stopped pretending. And now my kids, with whom I have these conversations, not about politics, but my kids are, of course, like all kids, they're totally opposed to hypocrisy. And they don't think that anyone, right, kids hate hypocrisy more than anything. And they don't think anyone should pretend to be anything that he really isn't. The older I get, the more I'm totally for hypocrisy. If you're not a hypocrite, your standards are too low. If you are actually living up to your ideals, that's pathetic. Aim higher, okay? So it turns out that there is value in pretending, because in the process of pretending, you become what you pretend to be, for one. For another, it's the social lubricant that keeps the machine from freezing up. I mean, politeness is hypocritical. How are you? I'm fine. How are you? We're both hungover, but we're pretending that we're fine so we can all get along. So the press had this deal where for 100 years, they were all kind of liberal, but they would at least pretend, well, we're actually objective. We really are. And that is better than not pretending. 2008, they totally just gave up. We're not pretending anymore. That's it. We love Barack Obama. And not just love isn't strong enough for the feelings the press have for Obama. Love is what you feel for the Red Sox, the Yankees, or, that's a kind of platonic love, or should be. The love the press feels for Barack Obama is a different species of love. I mean, you really have to be a 14-year-old boy to understand that kind of love. I mean, it's a sort of red in the face, moist palm, I wake up thinking about you, It's a florid love. It's a very sick kind of love, I would say. And I think that love and that protective feeling they felt about him cloaked a lot of real problems that are just now becoming obvious to the rest of us. I don't think they did Obama any favors by sucking up to him, and they certainly didn't do us any favors. And now they're starting to turn on him a little bit, though deep down they still worship him like a god. Hopefully it'll be different next time. Hopefully Chris Christie will make a difference. Thanks so much for indulging me. I really appreciate it.
I just wanted to see what this felt like. Keep going. I hope you agree, and to any of you who, I hope you agree that regardless of your political leanings, the ability to laugh at yourself contains a lot of wisdom and a lot of insight, and this guy had a lot of wisdom and a lot of insight and a lot of comedy. So one more time, thank you, Tucker Carlson. Now I get to tell you what you do next. It's just such a letdown, but there is lunch on the other side of the door. Golfers, the bus is departing at noon from in front of the hotel, and your lunch is on your cart. And I think that's the professional development sessions. They begin at 1. Everybody got that? Thank you for coming to today. Tomorrow's going to be just as good. Come back. We'll see you in the morning.